Hello, and welcome to the Old Soul Archaeology Podcast. My name is Michelle Janae. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Are you ready to dig deep?
Hello, and welcome to Old Soul Archaeology. My name is Michelle Janae. On today's episode of Old Soul Sojourn, my guest is Tyson Yunkaporta, author of the fabulous book Sand Talk. Tyson Yunkaporta is an academic, an arts critic, and a researcher who is a member of the Apalech Clan in far north Queensland, Australia. He carves traditional tools and weapons and also works as a senior lecturer in Indigenous Knowledges at Deakin University in Melbourne. He lives in Melbourne. In fact, we get to talk about our sister cities because I too live in Melbourne, but the Melbourne in Arkansas. So I wanted to preface our conversation a bit because it does meander. In fact, I told him when we were first getting started that I felt like it was a sand talk or a yarning. We were just going to kind of get together and compare stories, and it does kind of take on a walkabout feeling. I've never been on a walkabout, but I've seen movies. So I'm going to leave it at that and just say that was probably the closest I could imagine to being on a walkabout, was really kind of sharing stories and getting to know someone. So if you haven't read Sand Talk, some of the things we talk about might seem a little bit far out there, but they're actually related. And if you have read Sand Talk, you might see that still our ideas might feel unrelated, because I think that's the point of the book. It's the point of our conversation, which is just to meander for a while and share stories. So when I recorded, Tyson was recovering from surgery in his home in Melbourne, Australia. So he's semi-reclined, as he most graciously agrees to do the interview with me. We begin by starting out discussing what Sojourn is, and then talking about the mythologies of the echidnas and the emus. And that's quite fascinating. We get into Sand Talk only a little bit during our whole conversation, and that was on the subject of violence, a subject that's not easy for a lot of people to broach. And in fact, I started to tell him about a TV show that I had seen where they give you the rating up at the top, PG-13 or R or whatever it is, and then they give you the subheadings, the tags of what's going to be in the show. And this was a show about plants, and the tag at the top was violence, and it was really interesting. You'll have to listen to the conversation on that as you get into the interview. We talk about getting back to the land, something that's near and dear to Indigenous cultures and Aboriginal wisdom. We talk about how that's affected our respective children. At about minute 20 or so, we start to talk about the landscape. Again, we're transitioning from this discussion about the land and how it relates to economy, our society, and nature. We talk about how ecology and economy are so separate nowadays. Our economy is an inflated illusion and isn't really tied to the land at all. And if it is, it's generally not in any local sense. As we ship, we could be shipping all of our produce from here halfway across the world, and then I could go to the store and be buying produce from that exact place. So instead of eating off of the land where we live, we're crisscrossing and actually creating more emissions and global warming, if you want to call it that. About minute 30, we talk about his book in the respect that it's about provocations, thought experiments, really opening up to talking about ideas that aren't very comfortable, talking about ideas to give us a shift in perspective. We talk about life as life and life as an experiment. At about minute 40, Tyson goes into, or I ask him a question about what his definition of imagination is. And he really talked about imagination as awareness, not in the sense of make-believe or fantasy. And it's really interesting that he would come from that approach, because the Aboriginal culture and many Indigenous cultures actually believe in dream time. And as a shamanic practitioner, I too experience this world outside of the physical world. And it's not that we're imagining it or making it up. It really is truly that we become aware of forces, aware of ideas, aware of influences outside of ourselves that can completely enrich and change our lives. Anyways, that's just a short synopsis of the next hour. I do hope that you enjoy our meandering. I hope that you'll check out his book, Sand Talk, because I guarantee it, his writing is much better than my interview of him. In the respect that it does have a sort of a layout, but I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Tyson Yunkaporta. Here we go.
All right. Awesome. Welcome, Tyson. It's so good to have you here on the Old Soul Sojourn.
That's a great name for for a podcast. It's lovely. How you going?
You know, I like to think of the Sojourn as your as a sort of a sand talk, or your yarning. It's just some time spent together, so a layover of sorts.
Yeah. Now that's that's a Latin. That was come from a Latin word, I think. Sojournar or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it literally means to stop over. So the famous Sojourner Truth, she chose her name because she was basically a stopover person on Earth.
Yeah.
Yeah, we sojourn in this life.
Nice.
And transition. So great.
Yep.
I want to just dive right in. I mean, I was going through your book today, and I was re-listening to the podcast that I listened to with the amazing, brilliant Miller. And there are just so many ways to dive in. There's so many rabbit trails. And so I think that the quote that a book shouldn't just increase knowledge, but should increase what's knowable is probably the thing where I want to dive in. Because if there is anything I noticed about your book, it is about sparking conversation. It's not about like talking at someone, but really the us two idea you have. So I wanted to dive into that a little bit more from your perspective.
Yeah, there's not really very much information in that book, is there? Or, much knowledge or anything at all. Like, I know there's a few bits and pieces, but they're mostly provocations for thought and for patterns of thought and ways of thinking that connect people up to what they already know. But then from there, like sort of spider webbing out to all the things that they could know. And yeah, they're finding themselves at the center of a web of relations, that connects out to so many things. So a lot of people, they read the book and they say, "Oh, I love the bit where you said blah, blah, blah." And I'm like, yeah, I never said that. No two people are reading it the same way. You know what I mean? Because it invites people to bring their own story. And it's the use of that Indigenous pronoun that I kind of translated into English, that us two, the two of us. It's kind of like that. So that, it's not like I'm in your head or you're in mine. It's like we're both sitting in a relation that we have together, and where all the knowledge is in that relationship. And that's pretty cool. And that's just how you relate to that, and then out from that with everything around you. That's how you find that knowledge. So there's not much in there. Even half the facts that are in there are just rubbish anyway. They're like pop science. Like I'm not sure about, like, the first line in the book is just pop science, but it's not even well known enough to be popular even. So it's not either of those things, but it's like, I've only seen one research paper that gave me that information about the echidna's brain. But yeah, I don't know. There's only one paper and I haven't been able to find it again. So it's like, you have to have like 500 papers on something before you can go, all right, that's probably true. But yeah.
Well, I wonder if it's a new mythology. Joseph Campbell said, once we've lost all of our myths, we've kind of lost our way. So the whole echidna idea is appealing, I think, in that way. And I'm really curious about the emu. Is the emu story the same?
Yeah, no, I mean, well, the echidna dreaming stuff that I talk about, that's true.
Okay.
But the scientific stuff about brain in relation to body size, I can't affirm that, except to say that our stories do talk about echidna as a very, very smart thing. Yeah, but the emu story, that's a true story as well. And that comes from, I mean, I didn't even share my own like emu story, because my totem's Brolga from my clan, with the Apalech Clan up in Western Cape York. I got a Brolga story. but that's Brogo always fighting with the emu. So I've got emu stuff there to share. I didn't even share any of that because it's kind of like, well, that's nobody's business. That's my stuff.
Sure.
But you know, yeah, it's about the yarns that you have with people who are different from you. It's not about your life writing of like sharing, this is my knowledge that I know, you know, and I've accumulated this wisdom and I'm gonna like tap into that now for capital. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in making relationships with people. So the emu stories that I found were from, you know, on the other side of the continent, you know, Western Australia and you know, and way out west. But that one, that was the narcissist one. I mean, it kind of can, it's not that I'm saying that I'm like objective or anything, and that I'm trying to be like rational and objective, because, you know, I've got like a prejudice against emu from my own story. But so I'm straight, like I'm the first one to jump on and go, yeah, that emu is Cartwara. That's how they said over there. He's crazy. Over in Western Australia, you know. Yeah, so there's that story with him, and that was in the first big meeting. And it's like there's always there's always that guy in the meeting, and it's usually a guy. Sorry, guys, but it is usually male. It was like the first meeting in creation.
Yeah.
Like the first board meeting, basically, like all the different kinds of creatures. You know, the spirit of each one. You know, sitting around in the circle, deciding who was going to be the custodial species of all creation. And just by a process of elimination, it ended up being people. But yeah, it got right down to the last 5 or 6. And that's when the emu started jumping up and going, it's me. I'm the boss. I'm special. Look how fast I can run. It's spinning. He's going round and round, kicking up all the dust. And like everybody's just choking and going, oh, God, not him. Yeah.
I can relate from the archetypal
sense. He did so much damage. He just wrecked the meeting. He wrecked the place. He wrecked everything, just running round and round and round, demanding that everyone look at him and see how special he was and pick him, pick me. You know, basically just, you know what it's like. You get this sprinkler. Basically, he's just doing another dreaming version of tweets, tweets on a sprinkler system going out. 1,000 lies a minute until nobody knows what's going on. It was kind of like that. And that's pretty familiar, right?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. And I think I'm so fascinated because my dad raised emus for a while here, like livestock. But in the United States, emus they're not native. So they don't have a mythology. And certainly our culture doesn't appreciate mythology like Aboriginal and Indigenous peoples do as much. But yeah, he raised emu for some 20 years and nose to tail type processing. We used the emu oil. We ate everything, made crafts from the feathers and the nails. I mean, really like comprehensive. And so of course, in that way, I have a lot of respect for emu and its healing and its positive qualities. So to find out that other story is also fascinating.
So often they'll get like a bit like dinosaurs. They'll get like a piece of hardwood or a bit of rock, but they prefer a nice bit of hardwood that they'll get and just kind of, you know, snip down and swallow it, keep it in their belly to help with the digestion, you know.
Yeah, kind of like a gallstone.
Yeah, and they're amazing when you find them. They're like very beautiful pieces of wood. I wonder what kind of wood they use over there, like where you are. And that, because if you start looking at all those things and you say, well, why did they choose that wood? And then you look at the story of that tree that they prefer, you know, for the wood to bring into their belly, then you see that they're coming into relation with the spirit and the pattern of place and the story of that place. And they're somehow starting that long journey that all migrants must, you know, which is coming into place.
Right.
So you would see in another, I don't know, 300 to 500 years, you'd see that story starting to come. Maybe even sooner, you know. You know, we've got water buffalo have dreaming here now, and they've only been here for 150 years or something.
Oh, wow.
You know, and they have story.
Yeah.
And I think I mentioned in the book, Old Man Jumas, there's story for toads now. And because they have story and they've come in the right way, they've started to mutate in the places where there is story. They're starting to mutate, and they walk differently.
Mm.
And their feet are changing and evolving and adapting to that place, you know. And there's other things he says about him that I still don't believe yet, but I know I should believe it because he's always right. But I'm like, nah. Like he says, their eyes glow in the dark, like they got red eye. And he's pointing out all around him in the night. And we're sitting around a fire, and you see. And there are these little glow, and he said, that's the cane toad now. And they don't walk like that anymore. They walk like a cat.
Mm.
And they walk up high, and they, you know, switch their legs like that. They walk.
Yeah.
Yeah. But he see the purpose in creation of the cane toad is to have the story for cleaning up poison. Like all the toxins in the world and the radioactive waste, everything that they're dreaming is about half-life of toxins, and you know, because they have those poison sacs on their back there, you know. So anyway, it's a long way around, like just from this idea of an emu being in America. I mean, most of the gum trees, the eucalyptus trees in the world, are over there now too. Must be a story there too happening for them, even though they were used for a purpose that nobody asked them if they wanted to drain all of your wetlands for you to turn into real estate. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it's similar. Coincidentally, I was reading or listening to the podcast again, I think, where you had talked about the water being drained in Melbourne, or the diverting the river. I'm in Melbourne as well, but Melbourne, Arkansas. And this used to be, we're a population 1,800, so not quite as big as your city.
Yeah.
But this was a wetland as well. I mean, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, this was all lake. And so I know there's story there. Yeah.
And what are there a lot of eucalypts they've planted there to help drain the swamp?
You know what?
I know you just love draining the swamp over there, so.
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep doing like teasy little references there because I know you're really sensitive at the moment, and I really like pushing your buttons.
Actually,
keep going.
You know what? Actually, I want to talk about violence because I think that's a great place to push people's buttons. And
all right.
Yeah.
Well,
so
okay, let's look at the active violence between our two cities, which are now related. They're now twin sisters. Sorry, that's what's going on. So you're in Melbourne over there. I'm in Melbourne over here. They're both built on wetlands. You know, and probably it's funny that so they ripped up all the vegetation out of this swamp, you know, which is Melbourne today. Now I'm on the Bunurong part of that country. Lucky enough to be in one of the parts that's not contested. Yeah, so they cleared all the vegetation off this, drained it, and covered it with concrete pretty much. So I'm living on something that was a swamp. And yeah, but probably where you are, they've actually planted all those trees that were here to help actually suck up as much of the moisture out of the ground as possible, so that you could have some suburbs there. It's a weird situation. We've got a Coriolis effect of weirdness and upside downness happening between our two twin sister city swamps there. And and it's kind of swirling around in interesting ways with all kinds of glorious asymmetries, and I'm loving it.
I think you have to love it. I mean, you have to embrace it to some degree, because to not love it is to be in constant dissonance. Yeah.
Oh, there is a macabre and gruesome poetry to colonization that you have to learn to appreciate, or it'll just crush you.
Yeah. When you were talking with Brilliant on his podcast, I really kind of honed into the whole violence thing, because it was a ways into the podcast, I think. And yesterday or the day before, we were watching TV and we brought up this show on Netflix called In the Mind of Plants. And when you pull up something on TV, you get the ratings, whether it's approved for adults or children or what have you. And the word right at the top of the screen telling you what you should be prepared to see was violence. And I'm like, wow. Okay, this is what people need to hear. We need to hear that there is violence inherent in everything, and yet we want to shut our eyes to it. Or we think we can control it, right? I think that our justice system is it really is all about the average person divorcing themselves from that violence because they buy their steak at the grocery store. They don't have to deal with, the actual processing of it. My husband and I, we live on 6 acres. We raise rabbits. We process our own deer. And my kids are out here, 22 and 12 years old, processing, because that's what I think of as at least somewhere related to Indigenous wisdom, is that I am responsible. I am a part of this cycle. I can never be removed from it in spite of what they want me to think, right? Roofs over our heads.
You know what? They're not just processing. They're in a process.
Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They are part of a process. And that's kind of lovely, don't you think?
I absolutely do. And I think it's
so
something
they get to grow in that from the start of their life. And it's a hell of a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We need more of that.
I have some grown kids. I've raised about a dozen kids in my life, but my own 2 who are still way up north, they're in Cairns this day, like biologically, my 2, not like all the others that I've raised.
Yeah.
Were like, cousins and nephews and nieces, but my actual fruit of loin ones, they did grow up like right there, in the land. And for the first, 12 years of their lives, they didn't know anything else. They only knew the land.
Yeah.
And, culture, and that, that connection to land and landscape. And, it was a really huge disadvantage for them in the world. And they had pretty much, when they moved into town in Cairns up north, because it's not a big city, it's just a town. That did really disrupt their lives, because it's the first time they lived in an urban environment, and both had quite a bit of depression, trouble at school. They weren't fitting in very well with the world. They're both still having trouble in the marketplace, like with employment and stuff like that. But most people their age are. But fortunately, my daughter's about the only girl in her graduating class who hasn't become a cam girl just to survive. So, because she knows where to find the good roadkill, she'll be right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is, don't be ignoring the roadkill. There's good pickings there, as long as you get there first thing in the morning, Yeah. So it's a very, look, it's beautiful that your kids are growing up there in place in the land. And they do get over the disadvantage of when they have to enter the society, because, the society has affordances that are quite intuitive. Like they build everything to have affordances that you can just slip into, and you do get the hang of it eventually. You get depressed for about 4 or 5 years, but you get over that in the end. I think it's probably better to let them suffer that shock later than try and raise them and break them first. It's better that they should choose which parts of their mind get broken later, so that they can decide where to draw the line and what they want to give up, rather than just being broken from babies, which is a terrible thing.
Unfortunately,
I'm happy for your kids.
Yeah,
you get to grow up in that
I
process.
I have to back the story up a little bit, though, because they weren't born on the land. They were born in, California, Mexico City, or, those areas where we lived with their father. They decided to stay with their father. My current husband and I just moved to Arkansas a year ago to be with the land for cost of living, to get back to, we already did the hunting and the appreciation of life and death and animals out in California, but we just didn't have the same access. So my kids did decide to stay, but when they come out here, they partake in the land, and they, for whatever reason, they kind of have both worlds now. And the nice thing about that is they can still choose. They can still choose to move out here or appreciate.
They're still young enough to,
Yeah.
They sort of haven't been completely domesticated yet. And so, what a great thing you've done for them. What is it with everybody leaving California at the moment? It's like every time I talk to somebody, there's a bloody exodus story.
Well, for us, there were a couple of factors. We were up in the dangerous fire zones, and fire as of late. We do too. We weren't
It's
under.
also drying out, so
Yes.
there's no water there now. Yeah.
Yeah, we're not under any immediate threat. Although a couple of years ago, there were major fires within 5-10 miles of our home. But what was happening was the fire insurance was going to double our mortgage, and my husband is completely disabled and had limited income. And then my income, because we lived outside the city, we lived outside the state capital of Sacramento, kind of in the mountains, because we do love the land. And it just became unsustainable for a variety of reasons. And so,
So it's funny, the economy is part of your landscape, isn't it?
It is.
Like we separate these concepts like economy, society, nature. We separate these things, but it's all part of the landscape. And look, the biggest message in my book is if you don't move with the land will move you.
Yeah.
And I think you get that.
Yeah.
So you've had to migrate, and it hasn't killed you, eh? Like there's something about being able to be mobile and to be able to move with the land as the land's moving you on.
Yeah.
And you go to where you have to go to. And that's what human beings are going to have to remember, that we've forgotten. In only the last century, we've forgotten this.
Right.
And when I say we, not even most of us still know this. Most of us are still quite mobile, especially so Aboriginal population in Australia. Our communities are very itinerant. We do, move around. Even if we're living on our own country, we're still moving right around in the region. So, up on Cape York, you're moving all around all the time, from bloody Lockhart River to Pomperow to bloody Cowan. There's someone to stay with in all those places. And I've got quite a big orbit, like right around the continent. There's most places, there's people I know who I'm connected to that, I'll always have a bed and a feed and all that sort of thing. So you got to have good networks throughout every place. You have to be ready to be able to shift an entire population pretty quick, you know, and that needs a certain mindset, a certain way of thinking, of being. And so that you're not stuck there going, we lost everything in the fire. Like, you didn't lose anything in the fire, bros. You probably should have moved before it got there. But see, look at you go. You've been talking about migrants the whole time, from bloody trees to emus to everything else. And you are one.
Well, I like this quote that you have, and this is directly written from your book, so I know you said it. You said, in my travels, I saw that it was our ways, not our things, that grounded and sustained us. And that's so important, when we're so tied to things. And here, to bring up, I taking notes, you can't see my note card, but I wrote down economy is disconnected from ecology. Our ecology is all about the ways and the patterns, but our economy right now is all about the things. Our economy is driven by materialism. And so, I think that's
it's not
probably
supposed to be.
No,
it's supposed
not.
to. Those things are supposed to be one thing. That your economy is supposed to be a way of tracking and maintaining flows of exchange across the landscape, between the landscape and people, and then between people and other entities. That's what an economy is supposed to be. And in a lot of cases it is. Particularly when there's some kind of cataclysm that affects the real estate market, you see like the land forcing that connection back on, imposing that connection back on the economy, etc. But there's a lot of, here's where it goes wrong. When I say economy, I should say financial system, because that's where it's separate.
Right.
Because the financial system is a curse and an illusion. It's not a real economy. Like, we've got our lived economy as human beings,
right, where
we have, a velocity of the dollar, and we spend that same dollar 10 times in our community, and we look after each other, and our economy is strong that way. But then we've got this financial system, which is a completely different thing. Derivatives into infinity, et cetera, debt leveraged against capital, land as capital to leverage debt, which is like 2/3 of the capital in the world is land. Land is not meant to be capital. So that's this curse that's been laid over the top of the landscape. And it's what we need to get rid of. And that's what we need to deal with, is that financialization of the economy.
Right. Well, and people's children.
You get rid of that layer of finance, and you bring it back into, then you bring the economy back into relation with the landscape, and it becomes part of the landscape again. And that doesn't mean no debt, because, traditionally, our economic systems as human beings, as Indigenous people, whatever you want to call us, like pre-industrial, our systems, our economies have always been like systems of debits and credits.
Right.
You know, there is a myth. Barter is a myth. Barter actually never existed. That's just a way that like modern economists have fiat-splained bloody, you know, the mapped backwards to try and explain what the hell went on before. But it wasn't. It's debits and credits. But what they are is relational debits and credits, because
Right.
what you're creating in an exchange is an entanglement, is a relationship, and that's where the value is stored, in that relation between the traders.
Right.
And there's that sense of reciprocity and that sort of keeping track of value in that relation, you know, whereby there's that expectation and obligation that things will flow back or flow on.
Right. And I think it's an energy too. And I don't think it was necessarily us two in barter or exchange. It was the community. So if you gifted me something I needed, it didn't mean that you expected something of perceived equal value in return. You may have gotten that from someone else, as long as the community took care of itself.
But it's over the lifetime of our relationship, and that
Right.
might be over several generations, that, you know, there's an expectation that, there are debits and credits. It's
Right.
like, I'm not gonna, like, you know, put a lot of energy into putting together a bundle of pitchery, which is a narcotic, you know, over several weeks, and then just sort of give that to you and nothing comes back. You know, well, for a start, we're establishing a relationship, but then there's also down the track other things are going to happen. You know, you're going to give passage, assist people and guide people, you know, from my family through from that pitchery country and over into this other country over here, and you look after those people there, and you might give them some dried smoked eel meat there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which doesn't come from your country, because that was traded up from Melbourne, where I am now, which used to be a swamp. But not far away, there was aquaculture with canals, like masonry-lined canals, where archaeologists are digging that up now and scratching their head going, oh my God, these primitive people, how did they do masonry work for these aquaculture canals? And, you know, so lots of eels were bred and harvested and smoked and then traded right up through along all these trade routes. And, you know, these are very complex sort of things. And there are systems of debits and credits, and of tracking those, and there always have been. And when you talk to any native people from around the world, it'll be like, you know, on the surface of it, there'll be like that, yes, good trade kind of thing. Like,
sure.
Yeah, I give you this handful of corn, you give me that watch, you know, or something like this. And it's kind of, I don't know, it's kind of gammon. Like, gammon means it's false, like, you know, not right. Because it's not how it is. You know, it's not how it ever has been. If you scratch the story and start sitting down and talking to people, they go, yeah, it's not really like that. It's more about that relation. You know, and I think you see the quality of that more in that Braiding Sweetgrass book.
Yes, I have that book. Yeah.
But at the same time, there's something very satisfying and just so about the myths. You know, there's a Native American joke. Oh, I can't remember. Some Native American told me this joke, and it did make me laugh at the time. It's like about this a settler woman who picks up a native woman who's hitchhiking at night, and the settler woman suddenly becomes really uncomfortable because she remembers she's got a bottle of wine sitting on the seat beside her. And so she's got all kinds of things going through her head, and the native woman is like looking at the bottle of wine, and so the settler woman becomes really uncomfortable and blurts out, "I got it from my husband." And the native woman's quiet for a while, and she nods and says, "Good trade."
Nice. That's perfect.
Yeah. So, and it's funny, and it's just so, but then it's also not true, because it's, you know, there's more. Yeah, there's so much more going around that. And so then that person starts telling me all the other depths. I mean, it looks like it's just this barter thing on the surface, but there are depths to that story of a whole economic system going on. But also, the way kin is made through sex and marriage, and then how those relations are fluid, and how they're maintained and how they change, and the amount of agency and autonomy people have within those relations, and the purpose of sex and sexuality, as part of a kind of an ambassadorial thing, making connections and trade routes and treaties, and with other groups and all this kind of thing. Sounds like you think about being an accountant would have been the best job back in those days. It's really boring now, but if it involved like traveling around and having sex with lots of people, they sound like accountants were the rock stars of
right. So they're the basketball players.
Pre-agricultural society. I don't know. I'm speculating that's my, we were saying at the start with the book, it's all just there's not much information in there. It's just provocations and thought experiments and weird stuff and funny stuff like that. So don't go quoting me about like Paleolithic accountants being rock stars. Like, I'm just speculating.
I'm gonna let the podcast speak for you.
Yeah.
I think that I just lost my train of thought.
Yeah.
Shoot. I'll find it again.
That's my fault, because I went and mixed up sex and finance, and you're supposed to keep those things separate unless you're on Wall Street. I guess the parties they have kind of blur the lines a little.
They probably do, but that's interesting, because we talk about the things we're supposed to do, and I think that you said experiment. That was the word that I was trying to go back to. Thought experiments, right? And I think that our cultures, our civilizations, don't quite understand that this is an experiment. Like, every day is an experiment. When Brilliant Miller asked you, what is life? And you said, well, it's life, but it's also an experiment. And it's, for me personally, and for my husband, for example, we explore things that are good for us, for me personally versus for him, when it comes to ways of eating. And we follow something that, I think you had referred to, in eating more meat for health. I think you had referred to that on his podcast. And so we follow a carnivore diet right now, and we're finding it to be very good for us. But there's all of these squawk boxes and voices that say, oh my God, you're going to do this. Guess what? I'm an adult. I get to decide. I am my own experiment. And yet our civilization wants us to think that all of the answers are already out there. They're pat answers. And the funny thing about pat is that it has this idea of previously thought of. And so it's delivered without thought, almost cliche. So that's what we're getting in our news. That's what we're getting in a lot of these books that maybe are about, quote unquote, increasing knowledge instead of increasing what's knowable. I think that's why I love your book, is because it is such a deep dive into a gazillion rabbit holes that there are more questions than answers. And I love to sit with questions. Yeah,
that's it. Well, look, and things change. So yes, life is an experiment, and the being is an experiment, but then your way of being is your methodology.
Right.
In that experiment.
Yeah.
And your ways of knowing, that's your theoretical basis for that research, and your method of inquiry and all these kinds of things. And that changes halfway through. Often you've got to resubmit your ethics application. Anyway, I'm exhausting that metaphor, but you know what I mean. It's kind of an experiment. It is research, which is nice. Research, search again,
search again. Yeah.
And you're always looking again. If you're ever starting to feel like you have some kind of certainty about something, danger. Always move with the land. Move across your landscape. Here's the thing, your carnivore diet, it's always good for a season or two.
Right.
But where you are, you want to follow the bears. The bears have exactly the same digestive system as you, and you'd be surprised how close they are. And the people from where you are now, they've been following those bears forever, watching what they're eating in the right seasons, and that's how you learn what your diet is. And they'll show you where the edible fungi are. Anything a bear can eat, you can eat.
Wow.
So, you know, and so as the seasons shift, and as the landscape changes, there'll be different kinds of fungi in different places, different kinds of different things that they're going to eat, the roots that they're digging, berries that they're digging, picking, all these things.
Right.
You know, and they have, you know, a couple of seasons where it's just meat. It might be just fat salmon, you know,
Right.
for about probably 2 months, nothing else. And that's really important. Then you're thinking about, you also got to look at what they're doing. So they're putting the bones from that salmon up there they drag it off into the forest. They don't just eat it right there on the riverbank. They take it up in the forest, and those trees there have evolved to need those bones in that season over and over. And that is what's bringing the phosphorus up from the sea.
Yeah.
That forest is depending on. So you see dieback in forests where the bears are no longer doing the same, where the salmon runs have died off. You know, so you follow the bear and you learn how to be in relation with the landscape. You also learn about the changing landscape, because often there's not enough to eat there anymore and it's all dying. And the bears will be going in through the bins, and you might have to do some freeganism for a while. Hey.
We did have some bears at our home in California. Yeah.
But pretty much if you just get stuck on one season, you know, so I mean, it's possible to go, I will eat nothing but stone fruit from now on. You know, I've eaten stone fruit over this Christmas period, and I've eaten nothing else, and I feel great. But that stone fruit season in Australia, in this Melbourne, and in your Melbourne, like in another 6 months' time, that'll die off soon. That'll finish that season.
Right.
And I need to move on to the next thing. But if I stay there and go, well, stuff that, I can. There's a supply chain between me and the other Melbourne there. I'm going to bring them stone fruit across from there, and I'll just keep eating stone fruit, and that's what I'll eat from now on. You know, I'll die if I do that.
Right.
But eating stone fruit in its right season and having 3 months of that's where my diet, especially if I had a shitty diet before, I'm going to feel amazing just eating peaches.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean peaches are all I need forever.
Right.
Anyway, this is I have to keep telling myself this, because all I ever want to eat is meat, and that's all I like. And, you know, I've spent a few months carb free. And so I've taken that as an opportunity to eat hardly any vegetables and just, you know, rock the meat as much as.
Well, and that's what we're doing. And it's funny that
you feel great and you lose a lot of weight and you feel better. But you've got to remind yourself that, no, this isn't forever.
Right.
I need to get back to omnivorous stuff and think about where I am and what the season is and what I need to be eating. On the bright side, you know, white bread is seldom a seasonal part of your landscape.
Correct. Well,
in fact, never.
It's funny that you bring that back around to the plants. And I think in Arkansas, because the supply chains aren't quite as magnanimous as California or some other places, we don't get a lot of the imports and the exotic foods, and in a way you can kind of miss it. But at the same time, my husband and I are actually totally conscious now, having followed this way of eating, that seasons are important. Local native foods are important. So we don't really ship a bunch of stuff in, but in bringing this back around, it comes back to that Netflix show we were watching called In the Mind of Plants. And it talks about Venus flytraps. You know, again, the one thing was violence. And the way the show started was the acacia tree, and how when the elephants and the giraffes start eating the acacia tree in Africa, it sends out a actual like pheromone plant signal that changes the nature of the leaves to discourage the eating of it, right? And so what happened during a period of drought is that the kudu, they're like an antelope type species, started dying.
Yeah, I know them.
Right. They started dying because they were getting around the spikes that were defense mechanism number one for the acacia, but then they were still eating and eating and eating because there was nothing else to eat. And so the acacia said, we win, you know? And so these kudus started dying, and they looked absolutely healthy other than the fact that they're laying lifeless on the ground. And so it kind of brings back that whole idea of plants actually do have anti-nutrients. And when the season changes, whether it's brought on by weather or time of year or what have you, the plant changes as well. In a matter of that, like to refer back to your idea of interconnectedness. It's all relative.
Yeah,
And
that's
we've
it.
forgotten that because we can get fresh produce in from Mexico in the middle of winter.
Mm. Yeah, that's it. It's all so tricky. That's a beautiful story.
Yeah. So I want to close out because we're running up on time here, and I want to be as generous with you as you have been with me. Old Soul Archaeology is actually the name of the business. Old Soul Sojourn is where I spend time with my guests, my old souls. And the whole idea behind Old Soul Archaeology is that we're digging deep. We're trying to get back to that place of wisdom that we have within us. And I call it an old soul, and you call it Aboriginal. Of course, you have said in your book or suggested the idea that we're all refugees. We all have this connection to place, right? And sometimes we have migrated, but I can connect to Arkansas as much as I can look back at my Irish and German ancestry, right? What role does imagination play in reconnecting with our own Indigenous wisdom, as opposed to going out like the Dutch woman that called you to say, how do I get connected? And she was actually part of the Frisian people, right? What role does imagination play in reconnecting us with our own Indigenous wisdom, or just Indigenous wisdom in general?
Look, it's more about awareness.
Yeah.
I mean, just being aware of the things you can see, like for a start, which most people aren't. But also, being aware of the things that you can't see. I mean, in our way, imagination isn't something to invent new worlds.
Right.
To invent stories. It's about, it's a space, it's a dreaming space where you find story. Yeah. And you find those things, and you find places, and you find things occurring, past, present, and future, as one thing. That's what imagination really is. Yes. It's not about making things up. It's about finding the real and increasing your awareness of the real. And you know what? There's plenty in an infinite universe that's real. You don't need to make new stuff up. It's like, it's all there for you. So just chill. No one's found all of it yet, or bloody even a tenth of it yet. Yeah. So just enjoy doing that. Yeah. I was just thinking about that plants thing. Did you ever come across the M. Night Shyamalan film, The Event, I think it was called?
I believe so, where the plant was actually sending out this...
The plant started sending out this pheromonal signal that made humans start killing themselves. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah,
so every time you saw the wind blowing, you'd have to run like hell. Yeah,
yeah, it was a Mark Wahlberg film.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And it's awesome, It's like, yeah, Shyamalan and Marky Mark.
That's right, Shyamalan. Awesome. Yeah, he's a genius.
What's not to like?
Absolutely. Well, I love that you said that about imagination, because that's the way it's not fantasy. It's not make believe, but we can tap into intuition and inner wisdom. And the way we translate is imagination and what might be called dream time. Yeah. I've been studying shamanism and Indigenous wisdom for over 3 years now. And it's actually a shamanism course that I'm in that recommended your book. And I devoured it in one night. It was just absolutely amazing. I reached out via LinkedIn. You responded very graciously, and I can only imagine the amount of people that are wanting to feature you. And I love it because I feel the humility. I feel this idea that you never claim to be anything in your book that you're not. You admit that you're a human with mistakes, and that's the kind of people that we need to start these conversations, because they're not being the emu. Yeah, not that we can't be, right?
Yeah. But most of us aren't going to be the CEO of our community organization. Most of us aren't going to be the chairman of the committee, or, you know what I mean?
Right.
Most of us are going to be, just a boy like me. Like, yeah. He's just a nephew. And,
right.
Husband, father, uncle, grandson, all these things. And just carrying the water,
Yeah. Well, most of us don't want to be either.
Yeah, but in those roles, if you are in relation properly, there is more than enough intellectual stimulation to last you a lifetime in that.
Absolutely.
And, all knowledge can still flow through and from and with you. Yeah. And you don't have to play the finite game of, getting on top of the hierarchy, becoming the one who speaks for everybody, speaks for the place and the people and the company and the money, and accumulates the knowledge and accumulates the wealth and makes all the decisions. it's a finite game, that one. You don't have to do it.
Right.
Most of us will never be that. And most of the decisions and solutions that are going to work and get us through the next few decades, these will be demotic and emergent and organic, from the muck of all of us regular people.
Yeah.
Who aren't the chairman of the board,
Yeah.
who aren't
Yeah.
the elevated, amazing thinker of, oh my God, you have to read this book. This guy, he's a fucking genius. It's, yeah, most of us just aren't geniuses like that. And I make that very clear. I'm just exactly like,
What I think the point is we don't have to be.
No one's above me, no one's below me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm silly as hell and cheeky as hell, and I'm not particularly good scholar or practitioner of even my culture or anything else.
Yeah.
But, most of us are pretty bloody flawed, and out of that flawed big mix of diverse demotic bloody swirlings, if people can drop their ideologies and their egos for a second and just sort of dance together, that's where it all comes through. The most genius things emerge that no particular singular genius could produce.
Absolutely.
So let's dance.
Let's dance. That's beautiful.
Let's get these two Melbournes going.
Well, this Melbourne really needs a lot of it.
Yeah. And we'll just go the other way. We'll refill the swamp.
Yeah. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
Fill the swamp.
Fill the swamp. We have to be careful. They'll label us in a heartbeat.
So
it's true. Yeah. So it's just what they start doing with the labels, and I'm frustrated by how fast
when they dox you and people start throwing bricks at your children. That's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, like I said, I was barely through a couple of chapters and picked out a few things, and we already did a deep dive, and I probably have note cards I didn't even touch on, but it was very rich. Thank you again for your generosity. Thank you to your family. I know that they give up your time with them as well, and I wish you a speedy recovery. And
no worries.
Welcome. Thank you again for being on Old Soul Sojourn.
Nice. All right. Well, it was very good to meet you.
Very good to meet you too, Tyson. Bye-bye.